Hey,
Good
Josh,
morning.
we're just in the final countdown here. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are and if you're viewing live or recorded. Great to have you here and thanks for joining us for our latest forecast NL session, Clean Tech, Beyond the Buzzwords. I'm Rob Greenwood, Associate VP, Public Engagement and External Relations at Memorial University and Director of the Harris Center. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located today and to consider the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. Today's session looks closely at the clean tech industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. That's part of our ongoing Forecast NL series on climate, economy, and society in Newfoundland and Labrador. Clean tech, clean growth, green recovery, and other terms are all at the forefront of conversations about how we tackle climate change. But what exactly does it all mean? What are the tangible solutions within reach for us now? Which of those opportunities exist for Newfoundland and Labrador? What do we need to do to position ourselves to make the most out of those future opportunities and those that are right now? We're going to pose some of these questions today to our three panelists who have a wealth of knowledge on these topics. After hearing from our panelists, we have set aside the second half of this session for your questions. So get ready. Feel free to post them in the Q&A box at any point during the session, and we will read them out at the end or group them together if we get the time at the end. And remember, we are recording today's session, which will be posted online afterwards in our Forecast NL forum, online forum. Its address is harriscenterforum.ca/forecast-NL. And you can find that on the Harris Center website. So if your question doesn't get answered today, or if you think of one later on, you can go to that site. We have our Citizens Forum members who take part in all our sessions, along with people from across the province and around the world. And you're able to have an ongoing dialogue. And our panelists today will flag for them any issues or questions that come up, and they'll re-engage. So we really want to take advantage of our time today, but don't feel like this is your only chance. So please visit that website, and all our previous sessions are there as well. And please take part in the active discussions going on there. Now, let's meet our panelists. We are very happy today to welcome Ashley Noseworthy, the CEO and founder of Edgewise Environmental, a Newfoundland and Labrador-based environmental consultancy focused on marine mammals, seabirds, and underwater noise. Ashley has a BSc in biology from Memorial and completed her MSc in International Marine Environmental Consultancy at Newcastle University in the UK. Ashley is currently chair of EcoNext, formerly NIA, and the vice chair for the Marine Mammal Observer Association. Welcome, Ashley. Ashley is joined by Dr. Leslie James, professor and former Chevron chair in petroleum engineering in the Department of Process Engineering at Memorial. Dr. James' research interests focus on sustainable oil production by increasing oil recovery rates through enhanced and improved oil recovery. Dr. James has been awarded the Society of Petroleum Engineers Distinguished Achievement Award for Petroleum Engineering faculty. He's a professional engineer in Newfoundland and Labrador, and is also a past president of the Society of Core Analysts. Welcome, Dr. James, and your dog, who will flip past every now and again. We are also joined by Josh Green, arrived just on time. He's into just-in-time delivery now with his products. Josh is the CEO of MISA, which he founded as Empowered Homes in 2014, after completing his mechanical engineering degree at Dalhousie University. Josh and his co-founder and brother, Zach, have led the team at MISA to bring to market the MISA Smart Thermostat for baseboard heating, which has now shipped over 150,000. And there he is, holding it up, smiling broadly as he should. 150,000 of those devices already across Canada and the US, counting by the day, no doubt. And our pleasure to welcome this great panel, and thank you all for joining us. So we're going to fire some questions at each of you individually and then together. We'll keep this as dialogue and back and forth as we can, but make use of the time we have. So Leslie, we'll start with you. Clean tech is a broad area. How do you categorize it? Can you set the stage for us a little bit and give us an overview of just what people mean when they talk about clean tech?
Thanks, Rob, and good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So to define clean tech, one can spread their arms wide and think about really any process, product, or service that reduces negative environmental impacts through significant energy improvements and sustainable use of resources or environmental protection activities. That, my dear friends and colleagues, is a definition from Wikipedia, okay? But it really talks about the breadth and depth of clean tech. So again, it's everything we can do from, the energy reduction through making a product, our daily living, any incremental effort we can do and make towards reducing our environmental impact. We can think of it, and again, I'm oil and gas, so we can think of it in terms of energy efficiency, how we can reduce the energy it takes to produce a barrel of oil. It can be how we're going to use that barrel of oil, how we're going to capture the carbon at the end of it. So really, with clean tech, it goes hand in hand with what's called a circular economy now. So any improvement we can make towards bringing our processes or our workflows towards a circular economy where we're going to reuse and reduce, reuse, and recycle, then we're making an effort towards clean technology. When we think about, the big areas of clean tech, we can think about recycling programs. We can think about renewable energy. We can think about energy savings and sustainable building. So, we can look directly towards MISA. We can look towards how we're going to clean up the waste that we have in our environment. How are we going to use that? How are we going to prevent it in the future? How can we reduce and reuse our water? We don't think of water really here in Newfoundland and Labrador so much because we have so much of it. But in places where there isn't a lot of water, that's gray water, recycling and use. We can think of, just our energy savings, our switch to more, a cleaner type of energy. And again, we can point to our hydroelectricity. So, we won't get into the Muskrat Falls debate, but certainly, when that comes online and we look at where our electricity comes from in Newfoundland and Labrador, we're at one end of the spectrum and we're not relying very much on fossil fuels for our home heating and lighting. We can look towards even clean tech, policy and environmental finance. So you may have heard of environmental, social, and governance models, and so not only are we looking to see if our projects and what we're doing is economically viable now, we're actually comparing those projects on how good they are for the environment and the social and governance models used in developing or a natural resource project or any project. So it's broad. I think the better question is if you've got a question on, is this clean tech, ask it. And chances are, if it's reducing energy, if it's a move towards a greener way of doing things, then it is clean tech. Okay. And I also want to point out really two main parts now. We can prevent, and we can actually then reduce and reuse. So let's, on the clean tech side, if we can prevent that energy usage or the use of an unsustainable product, feedstock or product, then that is, really where we want to try to go. In the meantime, when we are creating waste streams, be it in air emissions, water emissions, or solid emissions and waste, what can we do to reduce those emissions? So let's prevent any emissions as much as we can on the upstream side, but also, the ones we do produce, let's handle them in a proper way, in a sustainable way.
Super. Thanks, Leslie. That really helped set the table. Ashley, as an environmental consultant yourself and your own firm, as well as chair of the Econex board, where you represent a whole whack of companies that make a living doing the types of things Leslie just talked about. But here in Newfoundland and Labrador, you must see a wide range of examples of clean tech in the province. Can you give us a sense of what the scope of activity actually happening is these days?
It's large. And I think I just need to preface this with, there's actually a lot happening in that space already in the province. There's a lot happening at the forefront, for example, with MISA. There's a lot happening in the back end in regards to government. And then there's a lot happening on the ground where, because perhaps we think that sometimes this is so specialized, or you need specialized types of technology, you might need to look a little bit different. So I actually made a list. I sat down and I made a list of those types of things that kind of came to my mind, of bringing it down a level to really give the personnel on this call a scope. Some of you probably already work in what would be considered clean tech, green tech, blue tech. Some of you perhaps might not realize, but that you do contribute. So starting with kind of the peripheral services, which is where I really find myself in kind of that niche environmental space, my role in clean tech is really, as you bring out these types of technologies, as we reduce emissions, as we work in energy sectors, and I'm very much focused on the ocean. So as you bring in, renewable energy, as we build, ships that are more fuel efficient and cut down on those emissions, the services that we provide are on the periphery of that, of also considering things like noise reduction, of also considering things like environmental mitigation when it comes to marine mammals and seabirds. And so there are peripheral services in the scope of clean tech that contribute to that make sure not only are we reducing emissions and are we becoming kind of cleaner and greener, but that we're doing things in an environmentally responsible way in other aspects as well. On my list, waste management technology. There is an incredible movement in the province to look at waste production and waste management. There are companies here in the province that are developing their own technology on how to best use this waste. Can we turn it into other things? Can we, turn it into something else here in the province so that we reduce those emissions of having to even ship it out? We want to make sure that we could do things perhaps closer to home. It does reduce quite a bit. The advent of renewable energy, and I know that there is another session that's probably going to come out on renewable energy, but there is a lot happening in that space of looking how to capitalize on those different types of energy so that we're not so reliant on fossil fuels. There is a ton of, and I love seeing this, of entrepreneurs and small businesses that are coming out focused in blue and green tech and just ways to reduce any type of footprint that we might have. And you see this a lot through the Entrepreneurship Center at MUN. You see it through Genesis. You see it through, EcoNext and TechNL and Noya and what was formerly PRNL, and I can't remember their acronym right now, their new acronym. You see that there is a big movement in the province to do that. ERINL, thank you, Leslie. Yes, that's their new acronym. You see it in aquaculture monitoring. You see it there are specialized consultants in the province that can now calculate your emissions and help you to minimize those emissions and completely go carbon neutral. There's the installation of solar panels that happen across 4 to 5 jurisdictions in Newfoundland. There's lots happening around wastewater treatment, and these are big issues for the province. Looking at wastewater treatment and wastewater monitoring within the province is a big issue. And I'm sure people on this call might live in some of those areas where that's an issue. And so looking at the technologies to develop that, to make sure that we can do that in a better, faster, more economical way, all contributes to clean tech. In the back end of this, there's the development of policy and a plan. There has to be a plan for the province, and that's happening in the back end. And we see that through our engagement with EcoNext and the government of what does that plan look like? We need a plan and we need a how. How are we going to do this? How are we dividing this up to make sure that everybody can contribute? It can't just be the government that does this. It can't just be the private sector that does this. We all need to contribute in our own way. There's the installation of EV charging stations across the province to make hybrid vehicles or fully electric vehicles more accessible. Because right now, I think, of course, they're looked at as perhaps a bit of a luxury item. I think everybody thinks Tesla when they think EV, but there are other models out there that we can certainly kind of get into. And there's the development of micro-credentials for clean technology industries. And so we're seeing this through Memorial, through MI, through Kean and Kona, and, for ourselves at Edgewise, you're seeing all of these little micro-credentials that are coming out that are going to help people transition. So maybe you worked in one industry and you want to transition into another. How do we do that? All of that's happening on the back end as well. And just to kind of, tie it all together, I actually just came back from Halifax on a marine renewable energy conference. And so, keeping it in the context of the province, there's lots happening here, but there's also lots happening within our region of Atlantic Canada, and there's lots happening on the federal level as well. So hopefully that gives some at-home examples and then gives a scope of kind of what's happening on the bigger stage.
Fantastic. That was a great list, Ashley. And in fact, years ago, there used to be a business resource center that the federal and provincial governments used to run, and it had a business opportunities database. Well, everything you just said is kind of a green tech business opportunities database. People should replay that list if they're looking for opportunities. And Josh, you certainly have landed on one. So this opening comments are kind of like a funnel. And we're coming now to the leading edge kind of individual firm example of a company that really is taking off in this space. As an entrepreneur, you've clearly seen an opportunity in the clean tech sector. What's your perspective on the opportunities for clean tech now and in the future in this province?
Certainly, yeah. Thanks for having me here. Maybe, yeah, just a little bit of a quick preamble there, just and before we kind of get into kind of specifics here from Newfoundland. I really do think that clean tech in general, depending on how you look at it, represents the largest economic opportunity globally. I think it is the largest economic opportunity, hands down. And that is what entrepreneurship, I think, is really truly about. It's about understanding where there's opportunity and then going after it. And just maybe just to unpack that a little bit more, it's about understanding where there are pockets of opportunity. And myself and my brother, we were very fortunate to stumble upon an opportunity for smart baseboard thermostats. But then importantly, and this is where I think entrepreneurs and also entrepreneurial mindset, because I think entrepreneurial mindset is a great thing because it can happen within organizations as well. But entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial mindset, it's about, okay, opportunity. Now let's come up with a creative solution way to actually go after and capitalize on that opportunity. And then the third part, which is actually the most important, and this is why I think Newfoundland is positioned so well for it, is you need people who are resilient and who are going to push through to make an idea reality. ideas are great, but making reality happen is everything. And that's where Newfoundlanders, I think, and Newfoundland and Labradorians can really make a difference, because we have that grit and determination. Because there are going to be challenges. There are going to be the world telling us you can't do something. No, we don't want that. And it's about the entrepreneurial mindset to be able to push through and execute to make something happen. And so I've been very fortunate for the team here at NISA to grow that we have and been able to go. And like you said, we've now got 150,000 thermostats out helping homeowners save energy at home. And there was a great opportunity there, and there's more for MISA in front of us that will continue to grow. But there are some other amazing entrepreneurial companies here in Newfoundland that are doing the same thing. And so you think about the guys at C4matics and the Water Lily about charging our electronics via the wind or via a river. That's amazing. There's a company called Duction who is working on making more efficient motors that are ultimately going to help us clean up marine transport and hopefully flying in electric planes someday. There are companies like Succeed and Emily Bland and what she's doing to be able to grow food more locally to reduce emissions. There are another great company, Milk Movement. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're in the supply chain for the dairy industry, and they are looking at ways of doing things more efficiently, ultimately reducing waste. So there is just so much entrepreneurial mindset here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And like I said, so those are individuals and entrepreneurs, but I think I get to talk to a lot of people here in Newfoundland, and which I'm super thankful for. There's a lot of entrepreneurial mindset also in corporations and companies that also want to make a difference. Yeah, that's the world that I come from, and I'm just so optimistic about the opportunity. I think with the right of everyone coming together, and Ashley did a great job of rounding it all out there, coming together, I think this is an enormous economic opportunity for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Fantastic. And so it's clear there the need globally is there, and our Forecast NL series is really highlighting that. And there are certainly champions and examples. And Josh, your point about the size of the opportunity is pretty compelling. So for all of you, do you think Newfoundland and Labrador is ready to take advantage of the opportunities for clean tech now? Obviously, there's some examples, but what's it going to take to move to the next level? Or are you optimistic that we're ready to roar with this? Maybe Ashley, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I love this question. So overall, yes, we're ready. We've been ready for a while. And we're ready to diversify, and we're really ready to kind of put the province on a bit of a pedestal and say, we can be really excellent at this and be a world leader. I think what it's going to take is a coming together of academia and industry and government in a way that hasn't been done before. So I think it's just going to take a little bit of a restructure, and it could be a little bit uncomfortable for all involved, but that's okay, because change comes from uncomfortable situations. And I think that we just need to think outside of the box on the how, because the opportunities are there, the people are in place, the momentum and the need is kind of building and growing. Like Josh said, even on a world stage, we are perfectly positioned. And so it's just a means of saying, okay, here is everybody in place and we're ready to do the work. Everybody, in the Econext Association and all of the associations that we have ever talked to are ready to do this and to help. And so it's just a matter of restructuring how we do this, because we need to do it quickly. And that's really where it comes down, is just doing this on perhaps a scale and a pace that may have not been seen before. But if we can do it, I think that sets an incredible example, not only for the rest of the country, but other countries around the world that are seeking some type of mechanism or how.
So I want to go to Leslie and Josh on this one, but before I do, maybe Ashley, the point about it might make us uncomfortable is interesting. And of course, change always requires some discomfort because there are vested interests and things we take for granted. And this is the way we do it. And if you're trying to do it differently, obviously that gets you out of that safe space. So would you put a finer focus on that? Where do you think the key areas that we need to confront that current comfort and shake things up a bit?
Diversification. We need to make sure that our portfolio as a province is extremely diversified in not only perhaps the types of energy that we're able to draw upon and export, but as well the types of businesses and the support for entrepreneurs. And we need better ways of working together. So things like IP. You have an incredible entrepreneurial mindset, and a lot of people here, working with academia, that can be difficult. Who gets the IP and how do we capitalize on things? That can be a stopping point for a lot of great projects. In government, we know that there are bureaucratic processes in place that can make things slow. And that can't be the way anymore. Things need to be sped up a little bit in order to make sure that we move at a pace that we're hitting those targets and that we put our skills and our money where our mouth is in regards to what we wrote on paper. And so it's that. And even to bring it home a little bit, I used to teach offshore survival and helicopter ditching. And anytime students would come in, my first comment to them was, you're here, I'm really happy you're here, but you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you're okay with that, you will learn and do everything you need to do to make sure that you get through safely and happy. And I think that kind of applies here. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Great analogy. Well, Leslie, we're both at the university, and Ashley certainly highlighted the important role of the university in that whole mix. IP is one aspect where the university has changed its policies significantly in the last few years. What are your thoughts on how we address the change needed and take advantage of the opportunities that are there?
Great question, Rob. I think, Ashley has pointed out the opportunity with and entrepreneurial spirit, and Josh has certainly highlighted it as well with respect to, it's in our blood. And I think many of us Newfoundlanders are born entrepreneurs, whether we, and I consider myself an intrapreneur within the Memorial ecosystem, certainly working on a few different projects. But the IP policy helps. And for those of you who don't know, intellectual property is IP. So that means if you come forward with an idea, how do we capitalize on it? And how do we ensure that it's attributed to the right people and you get your credit? We have to not be scared. So I think this points to, scared of working and collaborating with others. We can do more together than we can do by ourselves. And, and I look at the way I've changed as an individual researcher to working in large multidisciplinary groups with Norwegians. I'm not with people around the world. It doesn't matter where they're from. It's just, it's having to get comfortable in sharing and trusting in the process. And we have at Memorial, it is wonderful. I've been working through a couple of new contracts and research grants, and there's a lot more language now at all the funding levels to make sure that the discussions about intellectual property and non-disclosure and how does the partnership, potential partnership structures look like, that's being discussed now at the forefront of starting to work together as opposed to after the fact. And I think that's super, super important. I'm working on a couple of fascinating projects right now, one on a blue hydrogen feasibility through EcoNext and Oilco, and just to be part of that team to look at what the blue hydrogen landscape may look like here in the province is fantastic. Proposals going forward for as well, offshore ones, fishing rope recycling, and how do we make use of that? And so there's, it spans all levels. I definitely encourage anyone with an idea to reach out to the university and and see if there's someone that's interested in working with you to take your idea forward, because ideas come from all sorts of people. Talking to someone just this morning who is taking plastics and using them in creating plastic concrete blocks, essentially, and it's a company called PlayX out of New Brunswick. And he's a carpenter, by training, and had this idea. And so, ideas come from everywhere, but you could tell through the acumen that it does take this knowledge of, an entrepreneurial spirit and how to do things in the new way of collaboration and working together as a team.
Oh, that's great. And a lot of this is about, as we've discussed, change and a bit of myth busting, probably, because there's this long stereotype of the academic working in the lab who comes up with a brilliant idea, who moves it along gradually until it's finally a product commercialized. And there's some that happens that way, but the research on research really demonstrates, Leslie, it's like you're describing, collaborating with people outside the university. And that's what public engagement, of course, is all about. Ideas come from everywhere. And it's about the combining of the private sector, community, government. And similarly, Josh, there's a myth about the lone wolf, individualistic entrepreneur, and it's lonely at the top. And it was interesting, you started your discussion describing a bunch of other firms, not just basking in the amazing start that you guys have had. So what's your experience with that kind of need for networking? And is that one of the key elements for us to move forward as a province?
I definitely think it's one of the key elements. And I think we have done tremendous work. And when I say we, I mean the entire ecosystem that we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're off to a really great start. And I think a lot of us talk about that great collaborative approach that we have and how important it is that we protect that into the future, because as growth comes, things get more kind of busy and just higher stakes, and sometimes it's easy to lose sight of what's really important. And I hope, and I think when I talk to other leaders here in the community, that we're all committed to keeping that collaborative ecosystem approach here for whatever it takes. But maybe just to kind of round that out, ingredients here in the province for making this happen. I think there's two things also. So building on the community that I think we have here, that there were some really smart people many years ago that saw the need for investment in things like Genesis, things like MCE, things like Propel ICT, and that was seeds planted 5 and 10 years ago. And so there were some really smart people who made those investments and continued to do supporting and growing those things. And I think right now, the number of startups, the number of entrepreneurial ventures that is supported by that ecosystem today is just ginormous compared to what it used to be. And that will only continue. So it's amazing to see that growth. And then just like I come again from the private world, and I know that it takes money to make things happen. And so that is the other just ingredient that is needed. And so it was awesome to see the provincial government and kind of partner with Polaris Ventures and announcing Venture for Newfoundland 2. And now we have our second venture capital fund that will continue to invest in startups to be able to bring their ideas to market, and then hopefully reach the stage of MISA and collabs and Verifins, where they're then raising money outside Newfoundland and Labrador. And our latest round, we raised a $20 million round just a couple of months ago. 98% of that funding came from outside the province to be paid and spent here in the province. And that is a great story. And so those are the two things for me, the community that we have and support for funding is needed too.
Right on. Well, I want to segue to the audience questions here pretty quickly. Kathy Newhook is keeping track, and I see there's a couple in, so we'll turn to that in a minute. So the last one for this opening section, maybe Josh will stick with you while you have the floor, is you mentioned some of the things that are needed, but that we're doing a great job now addressing them. What would you see as a key barrier or obstacle, or what's left to fix to really advance clean tech in the province now? going forward before I ask Ashley and then Leslie the same thing?
It might sound trivial, but I think it's just a mindset shift. But I think that is very important. I think it's a mind shift that we need to know that clean tech is here today. People think about clean tech as a future thing. No, it is here today. It was and it is a now. It is a now thing. So that's a mind shift thing. I think we need a mind shift from Newfoundland and Labrador, we can access global markets. I still don't know if there's a ton of people really appreciating that we live in a globalized society and goods and services that we do here can be exported. And so that I think shift needs to change. But then also it's about Newfoundland and Labrador's brand on the global stage also needs to shift. From going out and raising the outside venture capital that I mentioned, we had to do a lot of selling to say, why would I invest my money in a Newfoundland-based company? I think that story is going to get easier when you see things like Verifin, when you see more things like more success stories. But I think there's a role to play for everyone to increase Newfoundland and Labrador's brand on the global stage about our perception of who we are, what are we good at, and why are we a force to be reckoned with. So that I think it's a mind shift change on a couple of different dimensions, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Ashley, you may agree with Josh, which is good, so you can say so. But also, I'd like to hear, is there something else that you would highlight as a current barrier that we need to address?
Sure. I mean, I guess first off, I'll start saying with the world needs a little more Newfoundland and Labrador. The world needs just the way that we conduct ourselves, in business and research and politics. I think the world could benefit from that, to see how we do that, and the level of grit that we have here. I think a barrier, it's not necessarily a barrier, but I would completely agree in the theme of just a mindset shift or change, in that it's the entire province. So anybody on the call that is here thinking, everybody might be located on the Avalon Peninsula, or it's very, St. John's focused. I recognize personally, and I know that others do as well, that there is immense opportunity and there are a lot of things happening in Corner Brook, in Labrador, with the Indigenous governments. It's happening all across the province. And so we really need to package ourselves to say, we have a huge, expansive, geographical area, and there are people located all around that area that are doing things. The hub might be St. John's, but there are people and there are companies and governments around the entirety of the province. And we need to get better, and again, not a barrier, but just a mindset shift of selling our story and advocating for one another. We want to see the province succeed. All of us succeed that way. If the province does better, we all do better. That's the kind of world we live in. And so I think it's just about motivating that as well, because when you have that reselling of your story and that public motivation, that can be a vehicle for faster change in regards to, policy and the government pieces, and getting research happening faster and more motivated. So it's really a ground up type thing, that I think it's not necessarily a barrier. It's just that we need to push it along faster.
Super, right on. So Leslie, again, you may agree with what Ashley and Josh had to say, although it'd be really interesting if you didn't on any angle. But also anything different you'd raise as a barrier now that we need to address?
So Rob, I'd like to bring up two. And one is top-down policy. And the second is, really the level of investment required. So from the top-down policy point of view, I agree with Ashley that it needs to be bottom up and there needs to be a culture shift, but we also need an ecosystem, and EcoNext is certainly helping with this, to lobby the government and have the structure in place so that we are a place where we can do business, and we're not just looking to make an individual change because they're, you know, Josh is a really smart person and so is Ashley, and they're wonderful entrepreneurs. But if we look at the big places where we can play, you know, the blue hydrogen, we've been talking our natural gas for years. These, you know, this takes huge policy changes and huge investments. And so when I see it from my point of view, you know, there's lots I can do as an individual, I can do in collaboration, but, you know, we're talking massive investment, and we need someone to own it and to drive it from the, you know, the really a stakeholder at the provincial level. Our natural resources, you know, we're talking huge capital investments to utilize them to the full extent, and to be able to become that clean producer of energy, be it our low emission oil and gas that we, you know, or oil that we're producing offshore, to the ability to sequester our CO2. I mean, most of our hydrogen today is actually generated through steam, the steam reforming method, and it uses natural gas or coal. And so, if, you know, in order to create hydrogen with the move, we need to have the mechanism in place and the investment in place to not only produce the hydrogen, bring the natural gas ashore, but worry about the CO2 and the carbon. So it's going to take, I think, a lot of minds, as Ashley said, from the ground up, but also the policy and the structure and really the key stakeholder driving the agenda.
Right on. So there's.
Can I hop in on that for just a moment?
Yes, please.
So I think Leslie made an excellent point. And I just want to say that we're not the only ones feeling that, but coming from a panel where there was a huge discussion on blue hydrogen or hydrogen in general across Atlantic Canada, yes to the capital investment. And it was that conversation of, you need the supply chain in place. And so, you know, we can do things on a small scale, but you're not going to get the big players come in unless you can prove it. And so, you know, it's kind of a feed-on effect, but who's going to take on that first one? And well, we need money to be put in. And so just to reiterate and bring it just kind of, you know, that's being discussed in the world of those frustrations of that capital investment and who's going to be the first to step up. Because, you know, if you can get first to market, they're doing some of this over in the UK. They're doing some of these things, you know, and Newfoundland could position itself to be first in Canada in some of these areas. And so there needs to be a big drive on that.
Right on. Well, superb discussion that ranges from the macro to the meso to the micro being the firm level action where it's happening. Meso is kind of sectoral and regional, and macro, of course, is the pan jurisdiction. And if you want to have those big areas advance, it takes that coordination of policy and investment and so on. So we'll open it up to the audience. Kathy, I see a couple of questions there. I think a few. Any that you want to lead off with or that cluster together?
Sure. There's a question here about large scale versus small scale, which is a nice segue. It seems like tech is always large scale technology driven. What's the role of small scale clean tech? For instance, in rural areas, circular economy, reuse, repair, shared economy, etc., micro energy cooperatives, regenerative agriculture, etc.
Lovely segue indeed. Who'd like to go first on that one?
Well, I'll just say, like, the first thing that comes to mind, and one of the companies that I mentioned, Succeed, I think that's exactly where companies like Succeed and others can play a huge role. What they've been able to do with their technology and different ways of thinking about things, getting into schools right across our province. And I think there's some really interesting things down the pipeline with even larger scale growing in kind of indoor greenhouses and applying that right here locally. I think there are examples of small, so I don't know if small is the correct word, but local opportunities for clean tech companies to really make a difference here locally. and at a scale that I think makes a ton of sense. So I think you really need both. So you do need the large scales of the world that are kind of everything that's made here and invested here on a global scale, but also here locally, there's certainly a role to play for that.
Right on. Leslie, you want to jump in on that one?
Absolutely. So I'll echo that. I mean, there are shifts and changes coming in agriculture, in fishing, fish waste. So, we need to go from not just taking the nice fillet and selling it, but using all parts of the cod, or the shells from our crab, etc. And so, it's trying to make those plants more efficient. I'll add in education. So Josh mentioned it, bring the education to the level, outreach programs. We're trying to really involve people and get them, and have ways to have that education accessible to everyone at all levels. So, we're that plastic recycling I was talking about, we're going to have a small lab scale version of it that we'll use for public outreach activities. It's getting it out there. It's having the entrepreneurship centers so that if you've got an idea, you can come forward and hopefully work it, find out funding opportunities and learn the whole process. And with respect to the small scale, again, those ideas come from everywhere. And I can't echo enough that if you've got an idea, reach out and see who can work on it with you, because the chances of success with that collaboration are much more than keeping the idea in your head, right? So, so bring forward the ideas. All scales are super important, and those regional, small, community ideas are just as important. It could be slag waste from our mills, right? And lumber yards. And so there's still a few of those going around. And we do projects with everyone around. And I'll point to Kelly and give a shout out to Kelly Hobbolt. We call her, or I call her the waste researcher. And certainly if there's wood waste or fish waste, and you want to look at processing it and how it can be used, there's some great resources here.
Right on. Thanks, Leslie. Ashley, on this one?
I think municipalities have a big role to play in some of this. I think this is where you can get the small scale. My first thought when this question was posed was, I believe the town of Portugal Cove has recently brought in a number of programs, and they want to make their municipality a kind of circular economy. And so if we're kind of dealing with that on that's a small scale and the large scale picture of the province. But if we make it more accessible to, municipalities, it's a way to kind of reach out perhaps to a broader audience. Small scale turns into large scale. And so these are the foundations and fundamentals of how that change is implemented across the province. And so while, of course, those large scale initiatives like blue or green hydrogen are kind of really big things on a corporate level, please, anybody on this call, do not underestimate the power that you hold in regards to the ideas and the changes that you can make and how that can turn into something quite large that can transcend across the province and outwards. So, to echo what they both said, if you have an idea, if it's something that you think can make a difference, there's a huge network of people here that are ready to support you in any way we can.
I know our Harris Center team has been working closely with our colleagues at Grenfell campus on a bioeconomy initiative that started in the forestry products with some of the really successful big sawmills that are operating around the province. And there's ways they can be partnering with agriculture and fishery and use of waste products. So a lot of that happening all over the province. Kathy, you got another question or comment there?
Sure. How do we balance the need for clean tech with the cost of adopting a new product or process? Sometimes that can have a hefty cost, especially on the front end. And for governments and institutions that are required to keep costs as low as possible, but even for individuals who are budget conscious with the increased cost of living, that can be a bit of a challenge. How do we shift that mindset?
I suspect Josh is living that daily in marketing his product. What would you say to that one, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. I think in my world of kind of technology and coming up with solutions, this is the kind of thing that happens with kind of all new kind of technologies, is that unfortunately things are expensive to start. They just are, and what's turned out to be great strategies is to come up with a strategy to say, hey, how is there a market opportunity that we can access today where the price point maybe is not as sensitive? And so, I mean, we launched our products to kind of I'd argue a kind of premium buyer who can afford to buy a $130 thermostat. But it is our ambition to work towards making our products more affordable by making the technology cheaper for people. And I think that model is something that needs to be applied across all industries everywhere. And I think the kind of key strategy, again, is to kind of look for the pockets where you can have that leading kind of success. And then, to Ash's point, small grows to big and expensive goes to cheap. And I think that's just the natural order of things. So it's looking for pockets where you can make things make sense today that then allows you to invest in scale and make it more efficient in the future.
Right on. Ashley, in your own consultancy and with your members with EcoNext, further thoughts on this one?
I think to bring it back to the buyer and even perhaps how I conduct myself when I'm buying things, I've definitely had a huge mental shift. And I think that's really where it needs to go. Is I think we all need to be more cognizant of where we're putting our money, even just as a one person buyer. Who am I supporting and how does this work? I have been hugely fascinated on a personal level with things like fast fashion, with things like, eating locally, making sure I support, if I'm going to buy a coffee, who am I going to, and how am I spending my $3 or $4 from buying a bougie coffee? It's those types of things that when we're talking on a clean tech panel, you might go like, why is she talking about coffee and where to put her money? But it's who you support to make those transitions easier. If you're supporting local companies, and they have a little bit of that boost, they can then invest in different types of technology that make them more efficient. And then it all transcends through the economy. So I guess, for EcoNext, for myself, but just on a personal level, how you spend your hard-earned dollars, I realize is really tough for everybody right now, going into Christmas, the economy in general, everything is more expensive, but just being aware of how your money feeds into that whole cycle, that cycle of the economy, who you're supporting, how you're supporting, and is what I am purchasing going to last me a long time? Or can I reuse that in a way where I'm not having to buy it over and over and over again, because all of the processes that are in place for me to get that product contribute to things outside perhaps of clean tech or a greener economy and things like that. So on a very small level, perhaps just think about it a little bit like that.
Right on. Leslie, thoughts on this from your perspective?
No, I think it's well covered. I mean, we need to go forward and make changes at every scale, like you mentioned, Rob. And I love the example of the clothes. I'll also bring in our appliances now, right? And cars, they're engineered to fail. That's just wrong. A dishwasher or a washing machine, my mothers and grandmothers lasted 20, 25 years. And now, the dishwasher repair person comes to my house and tells me, oh no, it's cheaper to get a new one. And that, that's not very circular. It's the wrong mindset. And I think things are starting to change. I can't say enough, the policy really drives that. And, you look at grocery stores in France and the UK not allowing plastics wrapping anymore, and also making sure that their food is, is not thrown out at the end of the day. Like, I mean, we could dumpster dive at Costco and feed a huge number of families. And so why is that allowed? I love the policy changes there. And yes, it's talking food security, it's talking clean tech. These are, I guess the other point, Rob, is that they're not individual points of discussion. And I think your even your selection of talks, indicates that there's so much overlap, and we need to tackle these big challenges together because they are interlinked. And so understanding where your solution or what you're doing and how it impacts the bigger ecosystem is super important.
Couldn't have said it better, Leslie. Thanks. And it's the whole intent of the Forecast NL series is, over a year and a half, we want to tackle the interconnected pieces of climate, economy, and society. And Kathy and her team will have a lot more work on this as we knit the pieces together at the end. We have time for a quick final question, maybe. Kathy?
I don't know if there's anything quick about this one, but it's a good final question.
All right, succinct.
What types of support is needed from government? There's lots of debate between where government investment needs to go. Recently, there was 35 million for offshore oil and gas. Some say that money should go into green industries and training for that transition. Are we still living in the past and throwing good after bad?
That's a great one to start with, Leslie, but I'll then go to Ashley and then Josh for your final thoughts. Leslie, on this one.
Okay, succinctly, there were two main points. I think, while our future to net zero at 2050 is going to be, a road of transition. And so we cannot throw away everything that we've been doing. There's just not the future methods or processes in place yet. But focusing on the transition and having the constructs in place to get there is what's really important. Where can we go for investment and where should the government invest is definitely in that energy transition. But again, I think, we need to really prioritize the transition and understand how the impact of that investment and where is it bringing us. And to the point, again, it's happening at all scales, but it's being able to have those impacts measurable and really driving the investment through measurable change.
Right on. Ashley.
I feel like I can feel the frustration perhaps from the person that asked this question of, are we living in the past? And for everything that was discussed on the panel of change will be uncomfortable and there will be a little bit of resistance when it comes to some of the large scale, big projects that can really fast track some of this into the Newfoundland economy. If you look at our traditional oil and gas sector, they're the ones that do have deep pockets and diversifying their portfolios on a global scale. And so, there is a lot of discussion to be had about the mechanisms to be put in place on how to aid that. The government really needs to put in, and we have a lot of back end discussion on this in regards to EcoNext, but again, with that diversification piece of what does that transition look like? And we want to make sure that we're diversifying ourselves, not only for economic prosperity, but to make sure that we're leaving behind a better place than we found. And that can be sustainable for the generations that keep coming up so that they can keep building on that. So, it's going to be tough and it's going to be hard. And I will not hide that from anybody, but I think that it is absolutely doable. And I think that we need to get into a mindset of how can all of the industries that we have in play in Newfoundland play a role in that transition, because there is buy-in there. And we need to make sure that we capitalize on that buy-in. to make that transition as fast and as painless as possible.
Thanks, Ashley. Josh, last word on this one.
Just one area where I think there absolutely could be near overnight change that I think people just forget about, and I'm super passionate about it. Our building energy efficiency codes need to double or triple overnight, and there's no reason why that couldn't happen. That is just a will to make that happen. The products, services, construction techniques, it all exists today, and that's one that I find really frustrating, is that there's no reason why we couldn't make our buildings twice as energy efficient tomorrow. Just one little quick story. Ashley, you talked about coffee cups. I'm passionate about hot water tanks. My hot water tank failed the other day, and it was a steel tank. It rusts out every 6 years, and I'm replacing a hot water tank. I replaced it with a plastic one last week. For an extra $300, I now have a plastic hot water tank that is more energy efficient. It won't go to the landfill in 6 years. In fact, it will last probably 6 decades for the life of the building. So I just think like you should just outlaw steel hot water tanks. You should just make electric vehicle charging infrastructure in garages part of the code. There's just like a lot of things there that should just happen.
Fantastic. A tool we like to use at the Harris Center all the time is that you plot impact versus ease of implementation. And
There's a lot of low-hanging
you
fruit.
have maximum impact, easy to implement, that's gold. Some things, though, are harder to transition. And certainly in my own work, my first 2 degrees were in history, looking at industrialization. And when the Industrial Revolution happened, you had emergent trends coexisting with residual. And we're living that now. Everything won't change right away. And in fact, what's fascinating is different companies in the same sector to pursue very different strategies. There is no black and white, clear-cut path to the new road. That's why we have to have these debates and discussions and identify the high impact, easy to implement, and then wrestle over the other ones. So this has been a superb discussion to get into this debate and reveal some of the lessons learned already and point the way forward. Please go to our Forecast NL website for the online forum. Really want to thank the panel for a superb job on a complex but really exciting area. I want to remind everybody, as I say, that Forecast NL website, harriscenterforum.ca/forecast-NL. It's on the Harris Center website to watch the recording of this session and to find out about future climate-related events in our Climate Economy and Society series. Stay tuned for the next session happening in January on energy and renewables, another big area of opportunity. Thanks to the Harris Center team for pulling the session together as always. And of course, thank you, the viewers, because it's only by engaging in these topics, understanding how it applies to us as consumers, families, communities, businesses, government, we can make a difference. So thanks a million for attending. Again, great job, panel. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you on our forum and at our next session. Take care.